What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors faces off against a television host who thinks he can corner him with loaded questions? Well, you're about to witness one of the most explosive interviews in Good Morning America history, and trust me, you won't believe how this escalates. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment because this story is absolutely wild. The studio lights were blazing hot that Tuesday morning as Denzel Washington settled into the plush interview chair across from Michael Strahan. The veteran actor had come to promote his latest film, but something felt different about this particular morning show appearance. Strahan had that look in his eyes, the one that suggested he had an agenda beyond the usual promotional softball questions. "So, Denzel," Strahan began, leaning forward with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Let's talk about your new movie. But first, I think our viewers would love to hear your thoughts on some of the, shall we say, controversial statements you've made recently about the industry." Denzel raised an eyebrow, his expression remaining composed but alert. "Controversial? I'm not sure what you're referring to, Michael. I've been pretty straightforward in my interviews." "Well," Strahan continued, shuffling through his notes with theatrical precision, "you've been quite vocal about certain practices in Hollywood, haven't you? Some might say you've been, ungrateful to an industry that's given you so much." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Denzel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained steady. "Ungrateful? That's an interesting choice of words, Michael. I've spent 40 years building my career on integrity and speaking truth. If that makes some people uncomfortable, that's not my problem." Strahan leaned back, clearly enjoying the tension he'd created. "But surely you understand that when you criticize the very system that made you a star, it comes across as, biting the hand that feeds you? The hand that feeds me?" Denzel's voice dropped an octave, and anyone who knew him well would have recognized the warning sign. "Let me tell you something about hands that feed, Michael. I've worked for every single opportunity I've gotten. I've shown up on time, learned my lines, respected my craft, and delivered performances that audiences remember. Nobody handed me anything." Of course," Strahan said with a dismissive wave. "But you have to admit that Hollywood has been very good to you. Some might argue that your recent comments about diversity and representation are just, fashionable talking points." The cameras captured the exact moment Denzel's expression shifted from professional courtesy to something much more serious. "Fashionable talking points? You think fighting for equality and representation is some kind of trend I'm following?" "I'm just saying," Strahan pressed on, seemingly oblivious to the dangerous ground he was treading, "that these issues have become very popular to discuss lately. It's almost like everyone's jumping on the bandwagon." Denzel sat forward in his chair, his eyes never leaving Strahan's face. "Michael, let me ask you something. How long have you been in television?" "Well, I've been with Good Morning America for several years now, and before that I had my talk show and of course my football career, so I'd say I have quite a bit of experience in front of cameras. And in all that experience," Denzel continued, his voice taking on the measured tone of someone making a very important point, "have you ever had to walk into a room and be the only person who looks like you? Have you ever had to prove that you belong there, not just once but every single day?" Strahan shifted uncomfortably. "Well, football is obviously a diverse sport, and television, it's different now than it used to be." "Different how?" Denzel pressed. "Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like you've had a pretty smooth path. Former NFL star transitions to television, gets handed a prime-time slot, morning show gig. Tell me, what obstacles did you have to overcome? What doors were slammed in your face? What roles were you told you weren't right for because of how you look?" The studio had gone completely quiet, except for the low hum of the cameras. Even the crew members had stopped their usual bustling around and were watching the exchange with rapt attention. Strahan's confident demeanor was beginning to crack. "Look, I'm not saying I haven't had challenges, but we're here to talk about your new movie, aren't we? Maybe we should get back to that." "Oh, now you want to talk about my movie?" Denzel's tone was deceptively calm. "A minute ago, you wanted to discuss my controversial statements and suggest that I'm jumping on bandwagons. Which is it, Michael?" "I think you're misunderstanding my questions," Strahan said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "I'm just trying to give our viewers a balanced perspective, Balanced, Denzel repeated, and there was something almost dangerous in his quiet tone. Let me tell you about balance, Michael. Balance would be asking me about my craft, about the choices I make as an actor, about the stories I choose to tell and why they matter. Balance would be showing the same respect you'd show to any other guest who spent 4 decades mastering their profession. I am showing you respect, Strahan protested, but even he seemed to realize how weak that sounded. Are you? Denzel asked. Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like you invited me here with an agenda. Like you decided before I even walked through that door what kind of interview this was going to be. The tension in the studio was now so thick you could cut it with a knife. Strahan looked toward his producers off camera, clearly seeking some kind of guidance, but found no help there. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every uncomfortable moment. I think you're being a little sensitive here, Denzel, Strahan said, and immediately everyone in the studio knew he'd made a terrible mistake. Denzel's eyes flashed. Sensitive? Did you just call me sensitive for expecting to be treated with basic professional respect? The word sensitive hung in the air like a lit fuse, and everyone in the studio could sense what was coming next. Strahan had crossed a line that no experienced interviewer should ever cross, especially not with someone of Denzel Washington's stature and reputation. You know what, Michael? Denzel said, his voice now carrying the full weight of his decades in the industry. I've been doing interviews since before you knew what a football was. I've sat across from Barbara Walters, Oprah, Charlie Rose, people who understood that an interview is a conversation between professionals, not an ambush. Strahan's face flushed red. Now hold on. This isn't an ambush. I'm asking legitimate questions that our viewers want answers to. Your viewers want answers? Denzel's laugh was sharp and humorless. Or do you want to create a moment for your highlight reel? Because there's a difference between journalism and entertainment, and right now I'm not sure which one you think you're doing. I'm doing my job, Strahan shot back, his professional mask finally slipping completely. And my job is to ask the hard questions, not just throw you softballs because you're some Hollywood legend. Hard questions? Denzel leaned forward, his presence filling the space between them. You want to ask hard questions? Then ask me about the craft. Ask me about the months I spent preparing for this role, the research I did, the emotional journey of bringing this character to life. Ask me about working with the director, about the themes we're exploring, about why this story matters. Those are hard questions, Michael. What you're doing is fishing for controversy. Strahan straightened in his chair, trying to regain control of the situation. Look, I think we're getting off track here. Let me try a different approach. Your new film deals with some heavy themes. Some critics have said it's too intense for mainstream audiences. How do you respond to that? For a moment, it seemed like the interview might get back on track. Denzel paused, considering the question. And for just a second, the studio relaxed. That's actually a fair question, Denzel said. And Strahan visibly relaxed. The film does deal with difficult subject matter, and we knew going in that it wouldn't be an easy watch. But that's exactly why these stories need to be told. Art isn't supposed to make you comfortable all the time. Sometimes it's supposed to challenge you, make you think, make you feel things you might not want to feel. Right. Strahan nodded, seeming to find his footing again. But don't you think there's a responsibility to your audience to provide some kind of, I don't know, hope? Some of your recent projects have been pretty dark. Hope? Denzel considered this. You know, Michael, hope isn't always about happy endings. Sometimes hope is about truth. Sometimes hope is about shining a light on problems so we can fix them. Sometimes hope is about showing people they're not alone in their struggles. But surely you understand that people go to movies to escape, to be entertained. They don't want to be lectured to. And there it was. The moment when Strahan revealed that he hadn't learned anything from the first part of their conversation. The accusation was subtle, but it was there. The suggestion that Denzel's work was somehow preachy or self-important. Denzel's expression darkened again. Lectured to? Is that what you think I do? You think I make films to lecture people? Well, no, that's not what I meant, Strahan backpedaled, but the damage was done. No, let's talk about this, Denzel said, his voice rising slightly. Because this is exactly the kind of thinking that keeps important stories from being told. The idea that art has to be digestible, comfortable, non-threatening, that if you tackle serious subjects, you're being preachy. I'm not saying that, Strahan protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Then what are you saying, Michael? Because I'm having trouble following your logic. First you suggest I'm ungrateful to an industry that made me a star. Then you imply that my advocacy for equality is just following trends. Now you're suggesting that my artistic choices are somehow problematic because they don't prioritize entertainment over substance. Help me understand what exactly you want from me. The studio crew was now openly staring. This had gone far beyond a typical celebrity interview and had become something much more personal and confrontational. I want honesty, Strahan said, his own voice rising to match Denzel's intensity. I want you to acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, some of your recent statements and choices come across as self-righteous. The accusation hit the studio like a thunderclap. Someone off camera actually gasped audibly. Strahan had just called one of the most respected actors in Hollywood self-righteous on live television. Denzel stood up slowly, his full height and presence commanding the entire studio. Self-righteous? You're calling me self-righteous? I'm saying that maybe you should consider how your words affect people, Strahan said, standing as well, though he looked significantly less imposing than his guest. Maybe you should think about whether your platform comes with some responsibility to be more positive, more unifying. My responsibility? Denzel's voice was now carrying the full force of his decades of experience and frustration. Let me tell you about responsibility, Michael. My responsibility is to my craft, to the stories I choose to tell, and to the truth. My responsibility is to the young actors who look up to me, to show them that you can have a career with integrity. My responsibility is to audiences who trust me to bring them authentic performances. But what about your responsibility to not alienate people? What about bringing people together instead of dividing them? Dividing them? Denzel's eyes flashed with genuine anger now. Who exactly am I dividing, Michael? People who believe in equality from people who don't? People who think representation matters from people who think it doesn't? Because if that's division, then I'm proud to be on the side I'm on. That's not what I meant and you know it, Strahan snapped, his own frustration finally boiling over. You're twisting my words. Am I? Because from where I stand, it sounds like you're asking me to tone down my advocacy for justice so that people who are uncomfortable with progress don't have to examine their own beliefs. Is that about right? The two men were now standing face to face, the interview table between them seeming like the only thing preventing a complete meltdown. The cameras continued to roll, capturing every moment of what was becoming one of the most explosive television interviews in recent memory. The silence stretched between them for what felt like an eternity. Behind the cameras, producers were frantically whispering to each other, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let this unprecedented moment continue to unfold live on national television. You know what your problem is, Michael? Denzel said, his voice now deadly calm. You've gotten comfortable. You've been handed platforms and opportunities, and you think that gives you the right to challenge people who've actually fought for their place at the table. I've fought for everything I've achieved, Strahan protested, but his voice sounded weak compared to Denzel's commanding presence. Have you? Denzel asked, tilting his head slightly. Tell me about the last time someone questioned whether you belonged in a room. Tell me about the last time you had to prove yourself not just as an athlete or a television host, but as a human being worthy of respect. That's not fair, Strahan said, but he was beginning to look trapped. Fair? Denzel's laugh was cold. You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been you doing your homework before this interview. Fair would have been treating me with the same courtesy you'd show any other professional. Fair would have been asking about my work instead of trying to tear down my character. Strahan looked around the studio desperately, seeking support from his crew, but found only uncomfortable faces staring back at him. Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot here. Maybe we should start over. Start over? Denzel shook his head slowly. No, Michael, we're way past that. You made your choices today. You decided to come at me with loaded questions and personal attacks. You decided to question my integrity, my motivations, my character. You don't get to walk that back now. I wasn't attacking your character, Strahan insisted, but his voice cracked slightly. Then what would you call it? Denzel demanded. You called me ungrateful. You suggested I was following trends. You called me sensitive and self-righteous. You implied that my work is preachy and divisive. What exactly would you call that if not character assassination? The studio was now completely silent, except for the low hum of equipment. Every eye was on these two men, and the tension was so thick, it was almost suffocating. I was trying to provide balance, Strahan said weakly. Balance? Denzel stepped closer to the table separating them. Let me tell you what balance looks like, Michael. Balance is preparation. Balance is respect. Balance is asking thoughtful questions that illuminate rather than interrogate. What you did here today wasn't balance. It was ambush journalism at its worst. You're being dramatic, Strahan said, and immediately realized he'd made yet another catastrophic error. Denzel's eyes went wide with disbelief. Dramatic? You just called me dramatic for defending myself against your unprofessional conduct? That's not what Strahan began, but Denzel cut him off. No, you know what, Michael? You're right. I am being dramatic. I'm being dramatic because I'm tired. I'm tired of people like you who think they can disrespect me and then act surprised when I respond. I'm tired of being told to smile and be grateful when someone tries to tear me down on television. I'm tired of having to defend my right to speak truth just because it makes some people uncomfortable. People like me? Strahan's voice rose defensively. What's that supposed to mean? People who've never had to fight for respect, Denzel said, his voice cutting through the studio like a blade. People who think success means you get to punch down instead of lift up. People who confuse being given a platform with earning the right to use it responsibly. I've earned everything I have, Strahan shot back. Have you earned the right to sit across from me and question my integrity? Denzel asked. Have you earned the right to suggest that my life's work is somehow less valuable because it challenges people to think? Have you earned the right to call me ungrateful for speaking truth to power? Strahan opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He was completely out of his depth, facing someone who had decades more experience in handling difficult conversations and confrontations. I'll tell you what you've earned, Michael, Denzel continued, his voice now rising with righteous anger. You've earned a reputation as someone who ambushes guests. You've earned the distinction of being the person who tried to tear down Denzel Washington on live television and failed miserably. You've earned yourself a moment that people will remember for all the wrong reasons. Now wait just a minute, Strahan said, his own anger finally matching Denzel's. I don't have to stand here and listen to you insult me. Insult you? Denzel's voice reached a new level of intensity. You think I'm insulting you? After everything you've said to me in the last 20 minutes? After you've questioned my character, my motivations, my professionalism, you think me pointing out your failures as an interviewer is an insult? I think this interview is over, Strahan declared, starting to remove his microphone. Oh, now the interview is over? Denzel laughed, but there was no humor in it. Now that you've said everything you wanted to say, now that you've gotten your sound bites and your confrontational moments, now the interview is over? That's convenient, Michael. End of chapter 2. End of chapter. Now that you've gotten your sound bites. I don't have to take this abuse, Strahan said, his voice shaking with anger and embarrassment. Abuse? Denzel's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more power than all his previous words combined. You call this abuse? This is accountability, Michael. This is what happens when you try to ambush someone who's been in this business longer than you've been walking. This is what happens when you mistake your platform for power and forget that respect is earned, not given. The studio erupted in chaos as producers finally decided they had to intervene. Security personnel began moving toward the set, though it was unclear whether they were there to escort Denzel out or to protect him from further provocation. I want him removed from the building, Strahan shouted to his producers, pointing at Denzel with a shaking finger. I want him banned from this network. This is completely unacceptable. Denzel looked at the approaching security and then back at Strahan, his expression now showing something that looked almost like pity. You know what, Michael? You're right about one thing. This is completely unacceptable. Your conduct today has been completely unacceptable, and I won't be part of it anymore. He began removing his own microphone with calm, deliberate movements, never taking his eyes off Strahan. "I came here to talk about my work, to share something meaningful with your audience. Instead, I got interrogated by someone who clearly has no respect for me, my career, or the craft I've dedicated my life to." "Security, please escort Mr. Washington out," Strahan called out, his voice cracking with the strain of trying to maintain authority in a situation where he had clearly lost all control. As security approached, Denzel held up a hand and spoke directly to the camera that was still rolling. "To anyone watching this, I want you to understand something. This is what happens when someone tries to use their platform to tear down rather than build up. This is what happens when preparation is replaced by provocation, when respect is abandoned for ratings." "Turn off the cameras," Strahan shouted, but the crew seemed frozen, unsure who they should be taking orders from in this unprecedented situation. Denzel walked toward the exit with his head held high, security flanking him but not restraining him. As he reached the edge of the set, he turned back one final time. "Good luck with your show, Michael. I hope you learned something from this." And with that, one of Hollywood's most respected actors walked off the Good Morning America set, leaving behind a host whose credibility lay in ruins and a studio full of people who had just witnessed television history. The cameras finally stopped rolling, but the damage was done. In 20 minutes, Michael Strahan had managed to destroy his own reputation while trying to attack someone far more prepared and professional than he could ever hope to be. What did you think of this explosive confrontation? Have you ever seen a celebrity interview go this wrong? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one.